We have a guest joining us by phone today. He's been on the show before. In fact, I want to talk a little bit with him about the first time he came on the show. His name is Rich Higgins. And before we bring him on, I'll give you the briefest of introduction to him. You may recognize his name. He came on the show actually back in 2017. He is, at this time, he is the Vice President of Unconstrained Analytics. He spent 20 years of his life combating terrorism. He's an expert on the nexus between theological doctrines and information age unconventional warfare. He served on the National Security Council in the Trump administration as the Director of Strategic Planning and was removed in 2017 after writing this warning memo, which I have in front of me, and which there was that's the reason we invited, years ago, we invited Rich Higgins to join me on the show, because he wrote a memo in 2017 called POTUS, which is President of the United States, and Political Warfare, dated May 2017. And that writing of that memo ended up in his being asked to leave the National Security Council. But he has a lengthy history in working in intelligence. He's in combating terrorism. And as I said, the nexus between theological doctrines and information age unconventional warfare. He has a long other resume, and he worked for the Department of Defense. He's worked in Special Operations Command. He worked as chair of Special Operations in Low Intensity Conflict at the National Defense University. Lots of other things, but what I want to talk with him about is the Trump White House and where we are today in 2020. So I believe we have Rich Higgins on the phone. Hi, Rich.
Hey, how are you, Deb? It's good to be back.
Good to have you, sir. So glad you could join me today. So, Rich, I always want to start with, I don't know if you even remember this, but back in 2017, when you published that memo, POTUS and Political Warfare, that was I think you'd been at we'd met you in the past before that, but I remember we were on vacation, and I heard about this and got a hold of you. I was doing my show from California and got a hold of you and had you talk about the memo. So, because it was really quite, and it was got a lot of attention, and the left didn't like it too well. And before I get into all that's happening now, I want to ask you to quickly summarize for our readers why you wrote this, our listeners, why you wrote this POTUS and Political Warfare in May of 2017. What were the basic points you were trying to get across?
Well, you have to go back in time, Debbie, to understand the genesis of the memo. It was, before the names Peter Strzok, before the name Lisa Page, before the name Andrew McCabe. These were not household names back then. So what I was describing to the president, unbeknownst to me at the time, was what we later found out to be Crossfire Hurricane and the unlawful subversion and sabotage and spying on both campaign and then President Trump. I recognized what was happening around me because that's kind of the community I come from, right? We would do these types of things to foreign leaders, Saddam Hussein, for example. And it was clearly, to me, happening to the president. And nobody seemed to really appreciate how serious the situation was. So I wrote the memo recognizing that H.R. McMaster and some of the guys at the National Security Council weren't on side. Got it to him, and when McMaster found out, my feet didn't hit the ground, and I was fired from the National Security Council, which, given the circumstances, I think is a badge of honor. The people who were attempting to take him out didn't like me much. And, going back to your monologue for a second, I think the thing about 2016 and now 2020 is everybody elected President Trump to put America first, right? And I think aside from the corruption and the graft and the extortion and all the other things that you hear about with your 5-minute monologue there, the thing that jumps out at me is about 10 years ago, the Central Intelligence Agency had 36 of their spies. These were Chinese nationals working on behalf of the United States in China. 36 of these nationals were hunted down and executed between 2010 and 2012. And it was largely passed off to a cyber brief. But now we know that in April of 2010, Hunter Biden was negotiating these enormous illicit fund activities with the Chinese. And the preliminary reporting is $1.5 billion went into this fund that Hunter Biden was standing up under BGR. But the actual numbers are actually much, much higher, a factor of 5 higher. It's in the neighborhood of $7 billion that went into that fund. So you can imagine what the fee is on that.
So you're suggesting, which I would completely seems plausible, but you're suggesting that part of the deal of Hunter Biden to get that kind of money, he actually may have been exposing these people who were working on America's behalf in China?
I think we have to call into question. I can't say for a fact that that's what happened, but the timing is certainly suspicious. That literally within a matter of months of that happening, we then say, see, we don't know what the Bidens gave up right now. Okay, clearly the Bidens are functioning as some sort of de facto agent for the government of China, which is a militantly, fascistic communist state. Certainly the most totalitarian state that has ever existed. And it boggles the mind that a major political party in the United States would put somebody like that forward, because they all knew. I mean, we know, the Democrat Party leadership knew about this corruption, and it really is just kind of it's almost shocked. I'm shocked, Debbie. I don't get shocked easily. I'm shocked by this.
Actually, that was one thing I was going to ask you. Really, I do want to talk about your new book, which we're going to show our listeners in a moment. I will tell you in full disclosure that this morning I was actually going through to read your Twitter feed and saw that you had a new book out, and that's why I got a hold of you. Wanted to see if you could join me. We are going to talk about your new book, which is called The Memo, and it is just a great new book that we're going to run through the connection between, there we have, Derek has a picture of The Memo, subtitled 20 Years Inside the Deep State Fighting for America First by Rich Higgins. I ordered it in Amazon today, both the physical copy, and then also got it on my Kindle, so I could skim it today, but I haven't been through the entire thing, although I definitely will do that. But it's called The Memo by you, and that's really when I realized that you had done this, written this new book. But back to where we are. So that was one question I had, even following all of this about the Bidens and what has come to light because of Hunter Biden's laptop being exposed, thankfully for the American people. But do you think it's possible that all that Hunter Biden was doing and funneling money to his dad and making arrangements for people to visit the White House, is it possible that somehow the Bidens kept that completely secret inside the Obama administration, or is it more likely some people had to know what he was doing?
Oh, certainly some people knew what he was doing. I mean, caution. I mean, we saw people warning about the Ukraine portion of the corruption. I mean, the thing that's amazing here is we have a whole constellation of corruption. We have the China corruption. We have the Ukraine corruption. We have the Moscow mayor corruption. Who knows what else is out there? I mean, we're at the point right now. We just basically have to assume this is a crime family that is running for the vice presidency of the United States. And when you look at the China thing, bothers me the most because they are the most, they're a nuclear power for starters. They're a real geopolitical competitor with the United States today. One of the 4 or 5 countries in the world we could have, potential real conflicts with them. And the fact that a man, Joe Biden, who was sitting on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, befriended the Chinese ambassador. That Chinese ambassador subsequently found himself arranging these deals in China for Hunter Biden, and who now sits as one of the I think he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the Chinese Communist Politburo, and is very close to Xi, and he is now basically de facto controlling Joe Biden, right? Just mind-boggling.
It is, and I would think that people inside the White House, they're happy in every administration, somebody or many somebodies who have the job to watch for potential attempts to corrupt elected officials, to approach them, to offer bribes, people trying to protect the administration so that because these kind of efforts may be made, and people whose job it is to keep an eye on the elected officials. So because any kind of corruption eventually hurts the whole administration, hurts the whole political party. So it seems like a lot of people had to turn their eyes the other way during the years that Joe Biden served as our vice president, or otherwise this would have all come to the surface publicly sooner. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, and I also think that a huge portion of the blame for the mess that became United States foreign policy under the Obama administration rests, certainly on the shoulders, squarely on the shoulders of the media and of journalists who have become and devolved into nothing but just propagandists. I mean, they're a disgrace. And I feel bad for the American public, who is just constantly having lies and distortions fed at them. Even to this day, still not covering the Biden laptop, and these corrupt intelligence officials coming out and saying, "Oh, it could be Russian disinformation." What a load! It's just remarkable. It's remarkable.
It is, and actually, that Russian disinformation. First, it was I can't remember the congressman's name who floated that idea. And then Joe Biden said in some interview, we have 50 former intelligence agencies have signed on saying this clearly is Russian disinformation. Fortunately, you had both DNI Ratcliffe and the FBI saying there's absolutely no evidence. No, I don't think so. And now more things are coming out that validate it, because there are other people mentioned in the emails that have now come to the surface who are saying, yeah, actually, these are all valid, these are real. It's the most amazing thing. Okay, I want to turn to something else, because one thing that you, it was Adam Schiff who said that, I couldn't think of his name. Okay, so one thing that you spoke about and you talk about a lot is this idea of a deep state. And one thing that the leftists do in order to mock, ridicule, silence people who try to expose what goes on inside some of government and use the expression deep state is a kind of treat it as just kind of a crazy conspiracy theory, that deep state does not really exist. It just exists in the mind of right-wing conspiracy theorists. There's no such real thing. But some things you talked about, and I want to dive in first. You were somewhere in the federal government arena in the Obama years, and I want to focus on that first, because part of what I've heard you speak on other occasions about during the Obama years, it appeared that the political agenda of the Obama administration was made evident and was the kind of the rule that made its way down within numerous agencies, the White House, numerous agencies, as the way things are going to be. It was like a beginning, I think, of the deep state. But can you talk about that, the Obama administration, and how there was just a pressing forward of its agenda at various levels of national security?
Yeah, look, Debbie, I mean, we can pretend Obama was the first black president, and we can pretend that he was a progressive liberal in the traditional sense of the word. He wasn't. I mean, he is an avowed Marxist ideologue. He is an open communist, an Alinskyite. His entire agenda ideologically was the weakening, what he used to call, right? I mean, do we remember the term, the managed decline of the United States? In service of this, wider socialist utopia that, that we all know is just, the pathway to hell, really. I mean, it's, they can package it up, but what we're really seeing is now on the streets with Black Lives Matter movement, with Antifa, is just a further escalation of the same movement. Now, we're 103 years arguably into the worldwide socialist revolution begun in the former Soviet Union or Russia, and we've seen over these 100 years the great citadels of the West fall one by one. The churches, the Catholic Church is totally fallen. These citadels of the guardians of the West, the CIA, right, the FBI. I mean, whoever thought you'd see the CIA and the FBI coming out defensive, in defense of communism against the American public? But we're seeing that happen, and it's very important that we keep our eyes open and recognize it, because I think where Obama was taking the country was, it was a co-option strategy. It was a Gramsci strategy. They talk about the long march through the institutions, the grabbing and the faux authority within these institutions that they claim for themselves. That's the deep state, right? They believe that the state is God, right? And if the state wills it, it should be. And that's what we see. The argument that's existing now between these two parties, though, and this is my ding on Republican Party, is I don't think they're focused enough on the American middle class. And we see that today, right? President Trump didn't win in 2016 because he was the best Republican in the party sense of the word. He won because he's an American. And in the interview he released today with Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes asked him, who do you think your supporters are? And the president looked at her briefly, and he didn't get into party politics. He said, the people who support me love America.
Yep.
And that's,
You can go ahead. Yeah, it was great. That actually I thought was a great strategic, the stroke of brilliance for the president to release that. There was a 60 Minutes interview. 60 Minutes wanted to put out on Sunday evening. He recorded the whole thing and put it out today. Yeah, it was really a smart move because as he's saying, by the time it makes it to the airwaves on Sunday night in 60 Minutes, it'll be greatly edited. He'll be made to look terrible. And he really, I love that he put it out. I thought it was just brilliant.
Yeah, look, he's a great guy. Okay, I mean, he's got weird personality. There's no question about that. He's an acquired taste. I'm from Boston, so the fast talking, loud, brash, that doesn't bother me. A lot of people don't know how to take that. And I think, the challenge that he's had, though, is because he doesn't come from government, right? I mean, he's never had to set policy outside of maybe his corporation before. But, the process of making, government policy with the U.S. government has 3 million employees, right? 3 million. It's just hard to even comprehend managing an organization that huge, right? So he had to learn some of the hard lessons. And when you pick up my book, you see I give a very unvarnished, truthful look at what it's like inside the system, why myself and others like me inside the system supported the president's MAGA agenda, and then the difficulties he encountered as he kind of, he landed on Omaha Beach and the fight began to take back the government, right? So it's a war story, it's a patriotic story, it's a story of betrayal, it's a story of revival, and I think, that's kind of America's story, and we're living it right now, and I hope people are paying attention because we are really living in historical times right now.
Oh, we most certainly are. Actually, I'll ask Derek, put the picture of your book up again. I'm not done talking about it. I want to put the picture up again. It's called, we're speaking with Rich Higgins. It's called The Memo, 20 Years Inside the Deep State, Fighting for America First. Great, great title. So now getting back to you, Rich, in this book, I love that you made the Omaha Beach analogy, and I love how, as you spoke about President Trump and what answer you gave to Leslie Stahl, this is what I've said over and over, President Trump did not really win he certainly is not a country club Republican, and he's not the right-wing, Christian Republican base. He just won because he said himself and encouraged people to love the idea of America, to remember what America is, to care about America's strength and her ability to move forward. And he just renewed a love of America, and it actually helped people realize that during the previous years under the Obama administration, there had been a gradual denigration, derision toward the idea of America, the goodness of America, the history of America. And this, just him coming along, President Trump coming and saying, no, America's a great country. We've got to restore that greatness. It lit the fire under so many people in America, not just Republicans, but people on both sides of the aisle, and certainly kind of the heartland America that had kind of been the victims of the radical movement that Obama put in place, the kind of socialist denigration of America's free markets. Those people, they wanted America back too. They wanted that free market back. Okay, now we're trying to talk about, so you went to work in the beginning of the Trump administration, and you worked in the national security function there. Your job was, I'm going to find it quickly, but you were don't tell me, strategic planning, part of a unit that was made of a director and 3 of us to work as planners, ideological warfare, focus on communism and Islam. First of all, is that ever your cup of tea or what? But can you describe what you're supposed to be doing in that job?
In a nutshell, so much of what the National Security Council does is focused on day-to-day, issues, right? So, this country did that, or this issue popped here, or this meeting's coming up. Our little group was designed to shape longer-term efforts. So, we would be looking at, the European theater, what are the policy things that we're dealing with there? What are the issues of the day? Myself, I was very much focused on the wider ideological challenges. And this really gets to the heart of, I think, one of the things that's facing us today is so much of the domestic fight where, you talk about, the left-wing Marxists and communists, or the jihadist groups and the subversive jihadist groups that are operating inside the United States. They are intertwined now. They're inextricably intertwined with a lot of the geopolitical challenges that we're facing. Communists vis-a-vis China, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., and the Islamist/jihadist threat because of the issues that we're facing now, and they seem to be creeping to the forefront day by day with Turkey. And so, it's this convergence of all of these threats that was really the purpose of having a strategic planning office, which is to be looking out over the horizon at the bigger, wider cultural, ideological, regional political issues that face the nation or that face the world.
I love that. I love that some of your caliber thinking and education and background was brought to bear on that subject. But you're into the National Security Council, and then did you realize fairly early on that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was just headed for trouble? I mean, could you tell that he was being set up by the FBI? How soon did it take for you to figure that out?
Well, I mean, I can tell you because I was with the campaign, and I was a counterterrorism advisor for them and spoke on their behalf at the Republican National Convention. What I saw during the transition was alarming. So we saw Putin's puppet and all the other commentary that we saw during the campaign. Normally that stuff goes on until Election Day. Somebody concedes and it kind of, you pack it up and you go home, right? Not this time. It accelerated. I even sent I have emails I sent to General Flynn warning him that clearly Clapper and Brennan were up to something. Same thing with Bannon, and we saw subversive actors getting inside the transition team, bringing in people who were not of the MAGA mindset. Some of them in pretty influential positions, and it was really, really alarming. And we were trying to get people's attention, but again, the euphoria of having been elected, right, with this little gaggle of 200 people, maybe. It was a true pirate ship of a campaign.
Yeah.
And and having been elected, I think Steve Bannon said it best. It's his 60 Minutes interview a couple of years ago, where he said, "Look, the original sin of the administration was turning to the Republican National Committee to help staff the administration, because all of a sudden, all the factions." And I'm not saying one thing or another about the factions, but all the factions in the Republican Party began competing with one another for this, for these power positions around a president who didn't have a kind of an entourage of his own. And so we had to deal with that. And it was really tough political fighting. And, very quickly, within, taking position at the NSC, very quickly became clear that there were about 10 guys, maybe 10 guys, and gals who had supported the MAGA agenda. And then you had kind of your institutional detailees, and we had, probably 70 or 80 Obama administration holdovers still there. And it was just surreal.
Well, that's actually the next thing I wanted to go to was, you mentioned in your book that you actually realized, and you were into the National Security Council under the very beginning time of President Trump's presidency. You mentioned that one of the people that you came to know there was Eric Ciaramella, who became the whistleblower. So how much did these Obama holdovers inside the NSC, how much do they end up undermining President Trump's agenda, then, and then is it still happening now? Do we still have enough of these deep state left-wing actors interfering with his agenda even today? But back then, how bad was it? How much power did they have?
Near total power. I mean, the president was fighting by himself. All right. I mean, he was literally fighting from the Oval Office out, and his closest advisors, many of them, were not ideologically aligned with him, and so so instead of when you look at like the Obama administration, his national security advisor, his chief of staff, his strategic advisors, Val Jarrett, they helped him implement their collective vision and drive their policy out from the Oval Office down into the executive branch, through the various cabinet secretaries and the National Security Council, etc. In the Trump administration, at the very beginning, what we saw was the president would say, "Hey, I want to, for example, withdraw from Afghanistan." That would go to the National Security Council staff. The National Security Council staff would give him 3 options back of what he was going to be able to do, none of which included withdrawing from Afghanistan.
It's like
right? So that was what would happen. And it was like this odd game of ping pong back and forth, right? It was like, who's in charge here? So this deep state, quote unquote deep state, I hate that term, by the way. It's just the institutional bureaucracy and then the interests that that protect it. And so you have this president in this ongoing battle with, in many respects, his own staff. And so, I think, particularly with like McMaster saw it, his job is to tell the president what the institutions would let him do. And he would say, we're going to form strategy based on our values and the process norms. And I'm like, well, normally you base your strategy on what your enemy is doing and what your objectives are and your interests, right? That didn't really matter to them. They saw their primary job as control this president.
That's actually one of the most amazing things, and people comment about it so often, even today in 2020, how President Trump, he had a vision back when he decided to run, announced he was running, and as he came forward in his candidacy in the presidency, about this idea of restoring America. And he's not a deeply ideological guy, and he's not really even a deeply, he's strategic intuitively, and he knows knows he loves America, he knows he loves freedom, he loves free markets, he loves a strong military, you got to have all that. But he really was, because he was so different in his background from former presidents, he didn't have the bench of people like Obama could reach out to when he took office and say, everyone knows my left-wing Marxist agenda, let's all get on board, and here's how we're going to push it out. Trump didn't have that. And so he had to struggle with, he had some people around him who at least believed in him and supported him, and certainly you were key in that. You were a supporter during the campaign, and then had a hard time in the National Security Council getting people to understand the seriousness of what you were saying. But is he still pretty much alone today? Do you sense he's got people around him that are better than at the beginning to help him do his agenda?
He has started, and I think it really began for him back in January. I saw him right around the time where it was clear he was going to come out of the impeachment okay, so mid to late January. He began making some personnel moves, right? He brought in a young guy named John McEntee to run his personnel office. He started, he moved Mulvaney down the road, and he brought in Mark Meadows. And I think, since then we've seen him bringing more and more people who are aligned with kind of his agenda. Unfortunately, we had, the COVID disaster, both in terms of its impact by, the biological threat therein, but these lockdowns and the draconian response and the media's utilization of it to just absolutely put pressure across the system. I mean, if you're wondering how much the Marxists and globalists hate President Trump, you need look no further than what they're doing with COVID.
Actually, who was on my show just yesterday, and you may have heard her name, Dr. Simone Gold, who's based in California. She happened to be in town yesterday. It was great. So she spoke at my conference a couple weeks ago, but then she was in studio yesterday. And she has, because of her background as a doctor and a lawyer, she's very clear on how this entire American response to COVID is political. It is irrational medically and irrational politically. So, but yeah, go ahead and tell. I'd love to have you elaborate your thoughts about how the response to COVID has been shaped by the cultural Marxists.
Well, COVID is a political warfare weapon now. I mean, it's yeah, sure. There is a virus. It is called COVID-19, or China virus, if you will. But the reality is that the economic lockdowns, the population control measures, the psychological warfare associated with it, the propaganda, the disinformation, the societal pressures. I mean, the prolific, and I mean prolific, economic attack that has come with this. It is absolutely mind-boggling. And we haven't begun to see the consequences of these decisions yet. I mean, we are going to have to really tighten our belt here and get smart about what we do with our budget going forward. And I think looking at it, just to throw a tactical example, the debate that's coming up tonight was supposed to be about foreign policy, or at least a large part of it was supposed to be about foreign policy. But the debate commission, recognizing that the president's actually been pretty effective on foreign policy, wants to again return it to COVID because it's the club they want to keep beating Trump with, right? The thing that bothers me about it as well is that the Marxists claim this. They claim anti-science is science, right? I mean, they're militantly hostile against reason and critical thinking. They disavow the scientific method on its face, right? They say, we believe in science, and in the next sentence they say boys can be girls, right? I mean, they are anti-science. But remember, the reason that they do that, okay, the reason they do that is that false science provides to them false authority. Wear your mask, right? I took ninth grade biology. I studied mechanical engineering undergrad. I took ninth grade biology. I also studied biochemical weapons in the Army. And the thing I always remember about biology is how small a virus was, because it floored me when I was a kid. And when I was in the Army, I remember them telling us, if they use a viral weapon against you, don't bother putting on your protective gear. It won't work.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Simone Gold was saying yesterday how the size of one microbe of this COVID-19 is 1/1000th the size of one strand of hair. So the mask, or the analogy, which is kind of entertaining, she uses is wearing a mask to keep out COVID microbes is like building a chain link fence to keep out mosquitoes. Completely pointless. It's great. It's a great analogy.
Right.
Okay, Rich, I could talk to you for, honestly, I said at the beginning 3 hours, but honestly, I love this conversation. I want to thank you for writing a great book. I mean, even just my skim read today, I know is one, I'm going to wait for the real paperback one to come, or the hardcover, so I can underline and do all that. But it's a great book. If I could ask Derek, who's filling in today for Matt the Wonderful. Derek, put that picture up again. The Memo, 20 Years Inside the Deep State, Fighting for America First by Rich Higgins. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle from Amazon and hardcover, which I have now done and will be here in a few weeks. So Rich Higgins, I love it. And I love the idea. You have been a fighter for the America First agenda, even before President Trump came along and gave it that name. So I thank you so much for being available today, and thank you for that great book, and thanks for joining me.
Hey, Debbie, thank you. Have a good one.
You too, sir. Okay, folks, I really do recommend that book. It is a great read, and he is, I have had him, I've brought him to Dallas several times for events and had him speak. He is one of the smartest people you will ever talk to, really, really bright, really well educated, and able to connect dots. He's just a brilliant thinker and writer in his time. What really happened to him inside the National Security Council was he put out a warning to the president and to the president's team about how the president was being undermined. And it's one of those memos. I think it's 7 or 8 pages. I have it right here, 7 or 8 pages. But, every sentence, numerous sentences are so lengthy and complex, you have to read them 3 times to realize, oh my gosh, I finally get what he's saying. Basically talking about the attack on President Trump and his MAGA agenda coming from the cultural Marxists, the deep state, whatever term you want to use, for the people who stayed inside the bureaucracy in Washington long after Obama left, with very much the effort to continue to push Obama's Marxist agenda while pretending they were there working with President Trump.